When intuition becomes a prison, there is a kind of suffering that doesn't scream, a kind of pain that finds no language in the outer world, yet echoes endlessly in the silence of the soul. It's the pain of the intuitive one, someone who feels before they understand, who senses before they see, who carries a kind of invisible wisdom that for that very reason is almost always untranslatable. How many times have you asked yourself if there's something wrong with sensing too much, with feeling the energy of a room before anyone says a word, with knowing something is coming, without a single rational clue to explain that knowing? The inner world of the intuitive is vast and sacred, but it can easily become a suffocating maze when it finds no echo or welcome in the outer world. Intuition, which could serve as refuge and compass, begins to act as a symbolic prison, where the person is trapped between what they feel deeply and what reality allows them to express. This video is a journey into that paradoxical landscape. We'll walk through the backstage of the intuitive psyche in the light of Carl Jung's depth psychology, uncovering the hidden dynamics that turn gifts into burdens and sensitivity into overwhelm. You'll begin to understand why certain patterns of frustration, isolation, and guilt keep repeating. And more importantly, you'll discover how to transmute intuitive pain into embodied self-knowledge, not as a form of spiritual escape, but as a true process of individuation. If you feel like a soul that sees the invisible but feels exiled in the visible, if you've ever wondered why your sensitivity feels more like a burden than a gift, then this video is the mirror you've been avoiding, but now need to face. Subscribe, share your insights in the comments, and allow yourself to dive in. What's revealed here might not change the outer world, but it could completely change the way you inhabit your inner world. Let's begin. The hidden pain of the intuitive, when the inner world becomes a prison instead of a refuge. Intuition is often romanticized as a subtle, almost magical gift, a quiet beacon that guides the individual along paths reason can't reach. Yet little is said about the loneliness that comes with such heightened perception, or the constant discomfort of living between two worlds, the visible and the invisible. For the intuitive, the inner world is immense. It's a living space, inhabited by symbols, archetypes, recurring images, and inexplicable sensations. But when this vast inner universe finds no listener, no validation, no outlet in the outer world, it risks becoming claustrophobic. What was once a sacred retreat turns into a cage, and what was once wisdom turns into psychic exhaustion. Carl Jung described this dynamic as one of the greatest dangers of an unintegrated inner life, the entrapment in what he called inflated fantasies. When intuition becomes disconnected from action and grounded reality, it collapses inward. The person becomes a prisoner of their own inner labyrinth, spinning around in circles of unconfirmed hunches, unrealized visions, and subjective truths that never take root in the real world. Under these conditions, sensitivity turns into isolation, and the silence that was once fertile becomes unbearable. Many intuitive people live as if they speak a secret language for which no translation exists. They feel what others don't feel, perceive what no one says, but can't transform any of it into connection. And the more intensely they sense, the more deeply they retreat. The result is an existential distance often mistaken for apathy, depression, or disinterest, when in reality it's an overflow of inner world. This is the point at which intuition must stop being an end in itself and become a bridge. It needs to touch reality, even if imperfectly. It needs to be expressed, turned into words, gestures, creation, presence. Without that movement outward, the intuitive risks being consumed by their own gift. As Jung warned, Every psychic content that we refuse to face consciously ends up looking back at us with dark eyes. And so, what once was a sacred refuge becomes a symbolic prison. In the next chapter, we'll explore the tension between what the intuitive perceives and the slow rhythm of the world around them. One of the main sources of chronic frustration for those who live more in soul time than in clock time. The collapse between ideal and reality, how the intuitive struggles with the slowness of the outer world. There is a silent kind of anguish that few know how to name, the feeling of having already seen the future through the eyes of the soul. While the body remains stuck in a present that moves in slow motion, the intuitive person carries within them visionary images, not as fantasies but as real possibilities. They anticipate events, sense directions, foresee turning points. It's as if their psyche were connected to a broader dimension of time, where things are revealed as seeds long before they bloom in the material world. This ability to see ahead could be a blessing, if not for the burden of coexisting with a world that insists on moving slowly. While the intuitive already inhabits what has not yet happened, the everyday demands patience, pragmatism, and linear thinking. This disconnect between internal perception and external reality generates chronic frustration, disguised irritation, and often a weariness that is not physical, but existential. Jung understood this as a form of archetypal misalignment. For him, the unconscious does not operate in chronological time, but in symbolic time. That's why the soul may be ready long before the ego is mature enough to act. When this difference in rhythm goes unrecognized, the intuitive begins to blame themselves. They feel inadequate for not being able to materialize what they've already envisioned, without realizing they're simply living on a different clock. This internal time gap can lead to a kind of spiritual anxiety, a nearly compulsive need to speed up the process, to push reality to catch up with the vision. But the soul's time cannot be forced. It must be embodied with humility, one step at a time, like someone learning to turn light into matter. The great challenge here is learning to hold space for the gap between what one sees and what one lives. To accept that not every vision is a call to immediate action. Some intuitions need only to be held, nurtured in silence until the moment when reality aligns with the psyche. Without this wisdom, the intuitive can become a perpetual malcontent, someone always projecting into the future, yet never truly present. It's within this void that the risk of toxic idealization is born, where nothing in the present feels enough, and all that is real seems too late compared to what should have been. But the soul doesn't work in haste. It works in precision. In the next chapter, we'll explore how inner retreat, far from being an escape or weakness, can be an essential alchemical stage in psychic transformation, a symbolic incubation that prepares the invisible to take shape. Introversion is not escape, what Jung taught about the alchemical value of inner retreat. In a culture that prizes constant exposure, visible productivity, and non-stop social interaction, the act of turning inward is often seen as weakness. The introvert, especially the intuitive one, is easily mistaken for someone who hides, who avoids reality, who retreats from life. But Carl Jung offered a profoundly different and much richer perspective. For him, authentic introversion is not a denial of the world, but a necessary journey into the inner cave where the soul's gold is refined. It is in psychic solitude, not in the crowd, that true transformation begins. To retreat, then, is not to disappear. It is to dive deep. In that dark and silent space, the psyche begins to reorganize. When the intuitive turns inward, they are not rejecting life. They are incubating new meaning, metabolizing experience, weaving symbols that still lack language. It's invisible work, yet deeply creative, a kind of archetypal gestation. Inner alchemy happens in the dark, The stage of nigredo, in alchemical terms, represents exactly this descent into inner chaos, a symbolic decomposition where old psychic structures dissolve to make room for new ones. From the outside, it may look like retreat, but from within, something profound is being transformed. This process, however, demands courage. Genuine retreat is not comfortable. It requires the person to face their own shadow, to confront repressed content, to stare into the emptiness beneath their certainties. It is not a pause. It is a reckoning, not an escape, but a refinement. The danger lies in mistaking this necessary retreat for chronic isolation. When the return to the world never happens, the alchemical process is interrupted. The gold that was forming in silence is not shared, not embodied, not turned into action or presence. And that's when introversion loses its symbolic value and becomes evasion. The path of individuation, what Jung called the process of becoming who you are, demands a continuous flow between inner descent and outer expression, between silence and presence, between incubation and realization. In the next chapter, we'll look at how unintegrated psychic content, especially shadow aspects, get projected outward, causing the intuitive to attract exactly what they fear and reject what they most need to grow. Symbolic projection. Why the intuitive attracts what they fear and rejects what they need. The deeper the inner life, the greater the risk of being trapped in the projections of one's own shadow. By nature, the intuitive is highly perceptive and symbolically attuned, not merely observing the world, but unconsciously interpreting it through the lens of their inner content. Without realizing it, they begin to live in a reality shaped more by internal conflict than by objective experience. Carl Jung warned with striking clarity, everything we fail to recognize in ourselves will be lived as fate coming from the outside. And this is precisely where the intuitive becomes vulnerable to recurring patterns, frustrating relationships, and misguided choices. What appears to be bad luck is often nothing more than a symbolic dance between the unconscious and the outer world. It's common, for instance, for intuitives to feel repelled by controlling, cold, or overly rational people. Yet in rejecting them, they may actually be rejecting the structuring forces of their own psyche, the inner aspect that organizes, defines, and protects. Likewise, when they attract chaotic or emotionally volatile situations, they may unconsciously be seeking a mirror of an ancestral wound yet to be healed. Projection, then, can be a path to self-knowledge, but only if it is recognized. The problem arises when the intuitive identifies solely with their elevated sensitivity and refuses to acknowledge their less noble aspects. The spiritualized archetype, when inflated, blocks shadow integration and prolongs suffering. For Jung, the encounter with the shadow is one of the most essential and painful stages of individuation. What the intuitive rejects in others is often a disowned part of themselves. And what they fear seeing in another is something that already lives within them, though denied. The world becomes a symbolic mirror where every outer figure holds an inner meaning. To recognize this truth is to begin a quiet revolution, the revolution of psychic responsibility. In this light, intuition becomes not just sensitivity, but discernment. What once was a blind impulse turns into conscious choice. In the next chapter, we'll uncover a subtle but common trap for intuitives in the midst of spiritual awakening: the unconscious compulsion to save others as a way of avoiding their own pain. The "I came to save" trap, a side effect of unbalanced spiritual awakening. Among spiritually awakened intuitives, there is a quiet, often invisible pattern that repeats with painful regularity: the compulsion to save others. At first glance, this urge seems noble. After all, those who deeply perceive human suffering, who feel others' pain as if it were their own, cannot remain indifferent. But beneath this need to help often lies a psychic trap, the avoidance of one's own wounds. Many intuitives develop caregiving skills early in life. They're seen as old souls, natural healers, beacons in the storm. But the danger arises when this role becomes a fixed identity. The intuitive becomes the one who listens to everyone, yet is heard by no one. The one who sacrifices for others, but silently begins to fall apart. Jung identified this as a manifestation of the hero archetype, specifically the inflated hero who believes they have a redemptive mission in the world. But the problem is, in trying to save others, the hero often forgets that true redemption always begins within. By projecting their own need for healing onto the external world, the intuitive avoids facing their inner wounds. When this pattern repeats, it leads to burnout, emotional exhaustion, resentment, a creeping sense of futility, even breakdowns. No matter how much they give, it's never enough. Others don't change, or only change temporarily. And the intuitive feels trapped in a cycle of frustration, as if burdened with a collective pain that was never theirs to carry. True spiritual awakening doesn't demand endless sacrifice, it demands embodied presence. It's not about saving the world, it's about becoming whole. It's not about carrying others' pain, it's about illuminating your own. Once this shift is understood, the intuitive can move from martyr to quiet master. Someone who leads by example, who offers presence, not salvation, who honors each soul's timing and knows that real healing is born from autonomy, not dependency. In the next chapter, we'll explore a powerful symbol of this integration between the invisible and the tangible. Jung's relationship with Lake Bollingen, where spirit finally met clay. Carl Jung and Lake Bollingen, where spirit meets clay. There comes a moment in the spiritual journey when the invisible must become form and the ethereal matter. Carl Jung understood this with primal clarity when he chose to build, with his own hands, a tower on the shores of Lake Bollingen. More than just a residence, that space became a living metaphor for the integration of the inner world with the tangible one. Jung wasn't seeking isolation, he was seeking grounding. It was his way of giving back to the earth what had come from the heavens. Every stone he laid, every handcrafted gesture, every wall he raised, all of it was a conscious act of reconciling spirit with body, symbol with action, intuition with manifestation. For the modern intuitive, immersed in abstraction, saturated with symbolic layers of thought, Jung's practice offers a vital teaching. Spirituality must be embodied. It's not enough to feel, foresee, or imagine. These perceptions must be turned into something concrete, a piece of writing, an honest conversation, a project, a soulful act in daily life. Lake Bollingen wasn't just a physical place. It was a state of consciousness. It represented the moment when a person stops using transcendence as escape and starts living spirituality as grounded presence. There, Jung would cook, write by hand, chop wood. Simple tasks that reconnected him to the now, protecting him from being swallowed by the vastness of the unconscious. This practical dimension is the antidote to intuitive collapse. Because too much ungrounded vision can lead to dissociation, spiritual delusion, or lofty idealism with no anchor. Clay, in this context, is more than earth. It's reality's substance. It's what the feet must touch, even as the soul soars. The intuitive who doesn't engage with matter, who doesn't create, build, or shape something tangible, risks living entirely in the realm of ideas, where everything is potential, but nothing is truly lived. Jung's tower reminds us, the invisible only finds meaning when it's embodied in the real world. In the next chapter, we'll explore one of the most intimate conflicts faced by intuitives on the path of individuation. The deep guilt that arises when following one's own path feels like a betrayal of inherited suffering. when intuition feels like betrayal, following your path and awakening. Transgenerational guilt. Not all guilt comes from doing something wrong. Some arises from the simple act of being true to yourself. For the intuitive on the path of individuation, a quiet but profound dilemma often surfaces, the sense that by choosing an authentic life, they are somehow betraying their roots. This guilt isn't rational. It doesn't stem from concrete actions. It lives in the deeper layers of the psyche, where memories aren't just personal, they're inherited. Emotional imprints passed down through family, culture, and ancestry. Jung called this the collective unconscious, but he also recognized the importance of transgenerational legacy, the emotional threads that weave through generations silently. When the intuitive begins to prioritize themselves, saying no, following their intuition, breaking inherited patterns, leaving toxic relationships, or investing in personal expansion, they are symbolically breaking an invisible contract with the past. And that break, even when necessary, often brings a flood of conflicting emotions: fear, guilt, nostalgia, ambivalence. It's as if well-being becomes an act of disloyalty, as if being okay means forgetting those who stayed behind, as if inherited pain were a kind of silent pact, and letting go of it would mean betraying the tribe, the family, the lineage. This dynamic is especially common among those who come from lineages marked by chronic suffering, scarcity, emotional repression, unprocessed trauma. By envisioning a new future, the intuitive unintentionally touches wounds their ancestors couldn't heal. And at that point, the impulse to grow may be sabotaged by ancient ghosts. Jung reminds us that individuation always involves separation. But that separation doesn't have to be destructive. It can be an act of evolutionary love. By walking their own path, the intuitive is not rejecting the past. They're honoring it by transcending it. They say, "I go forward for all of us, so that the pain ends with me and freedom begins." Transgenerational healing doesn't happen through self-denial. It happens through the courage to fully live your own destiny. In the final chapter, we'll explore a theme that's vital to the emotional health of the intuitive: the difference between the soul's fire and emotional wildfires, a distinction that can change the course of an entire life. Spiritual fire versus emotional wildfire, learning to tell the difference between passion and compulsion. Not every fire illuminates. Some simply consume. For the intuitive, attuned to subtle layers of reality, it's easy to mistake a soul calling for an intense emotional impulse. Enthusiasm can feel overwhelming. Passions arrive like revelations. Ideas seem like divine messages. But amid so much intensity, a crucial question arises. Is what I'm feeling true intuition or compulsion? Carl Jung taught that what truly comes from the self, the unifying center of the psyche, does not arrive as urgency, but as clarity. The spiritual fire doesn't shout. It warms. It doesn't rush. It guides. Emotional impulses, on the other hand, when mistaken for intuition, often show up as anxiety, urgency, or obsession. This is where the intuitive must learn not just to listen to what they feel, but how they feel it. True spiritual fire is steady, even when intense. It burns with purpose, not restlessness. It brings vision, not chaos. Emotional wildfire, however seductive, is disorganized. It burns without direction. It moves from neediness, not vocation. It can feel like divine guidance, but it's often just adrenaline dressed up as inner truth. Many projects, relationships, and life decisions have been launched by intuitives gripped by this compulsive fire. And many crashes have followed, because what begins outside the axis of the self will eventually lead to imbalance sooner or later. And the cost is high: exhaustion, disillusionment, and the erosion of trust in one's own intuition. Learning to tell the difference between these two fires is a sign of spiritual maturity. It means knowing that not everything that glows is insight. It means accepting that the soul speaks in a quieter voice than the excited ego. The compass is the body. The soul's fire grounds you. Emotional wildfire pulls the ground from under you. One expands, the other agitates. One fosters connection, the other demands instant reaction. To pause, breathe, wait a day before acting, that's the gesture that separates true intuition from disguised impulsiveness. With this discernment, the intuitive stops being a victim of their own passions and becomes a master of their energy. They don't extinguish the fire, they learn to direct it. When intuition is honored, destiny aligns. The soul of the intuitive is a sacred tapestry woven from invisible threads that link ancestral past to possible future. Every silent pain, every repeated pattern, every incomprehensible sensation, none of it is noise. It's language, the language of the unconscious, of the shadow, of the self-whispering truths the ego is not yet ready to hear. You are not broken, you are becoming. Throughout this video, you've seen that the inner prison is not punishment, it's an invitation. That the slowness of the world is not a sentence, it's a rhythm. That introversion is not a flaw, it's an alchemical furnace. That projection is not a detour, it's a mirror. That the urge to save is not a calling, it's a need for self-return. That matter is not an obstacle, it's a temple. That inherited guilt is not fate, it's a portal. And that true fire does not burn you down, it transforms you. So now the question is, what will you do with all of this? Because understanding is only the beginning. Transformation demands presence, commitment, and practice. Intuition must leave the symbolic plane and touch the ground. It must become action, habit, creation, and conscious choice. And this journey doesn't end here. This channel exists for those who refuse shallow explanations, for those who want not only to understand themselves, but to become whole. If that resonates with you, subscribe now. Share this video with others who carry the same sensitivity. And in the comments, tell us which of these truths most deeply touched your journey. In future videos, we'll dive even deeper into the themes that only began to unfold here. We'll explore the archetype of the wounded healer, the exile of the intuitive soul, the silence of the intuitive child, and how to transform symbolic pain into living art. Because this path isn't about adjusting yourself to the world, it's about allowing the world to reorient itself around your most intimate truth. And for that, you must keep going. Individuation is not a destination, it is a daily practice. And we'll be here, step by step, with you.